Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the last session for this GEEF 2023. Last but not least, we are tackling a subject matter that is absolutely essential for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is SDG 4, quality education. But in times of climate crisis, how can quality education actually happen even better? By greening it. This session, ladies and gentlemen, is presented to you by the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens and many of our dear partners and collaborators, and it is about greening education. It's my pleasure and privilege to give the floor to Katrin Harvey, the Chief Operating Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, to introduce her panel.
Hello, thank you so much, Monica. I'm very happy to be here today with our exciting panel of extraordinary women who talk about the Ban Ki-moon Center's work that we do together with our partners when it comes to greening education and their particular roles in these activities. I'm so happy that we can have this conversation to you today, and I'm very grateful to send our regards to Korea. We're going to start with two welcome remarks from Mr. Ban Ki-moon and the UNESCO Assistant Director General Stefania Giannini, and then we'll dive into our conversation. So if I could please ask for the two welcome statements to start right now. Thank you.
It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this panel on greening education in a time of climate crisis at the Global Engagement and Empowerment Forum 2023. The detrimental effects of rising temperatures are manifold and reach into various aspects of our lives. Climate change is fueling conflict, inequality, migration, and public health risks around the world. These dynamics will continue to worsen in the absence of strong multilateral action and renewed political will. Climate change is already affecting the lives of the poorest people in this world the hardest. We are still far from the promise that many countries gave in Paris in 2015 on emission reduction and resilience measures, and we are still struggling to raise $100 billion of yearly commitments in climate finance, which were negotiated even before Paris. There is a strong and urgent need for more effective climate action. The 2022 UN Transforming Education Summit has reaffirmed the critical role that education plays in responding to the climate crisis. Yet, according to 2021 UNESCO data from 100 countries, 47% of national curriculum frameworks made no reference to climate change, with less than 40% of teachers feeling confident in teaching it, and only 1/3 being capable of explaining the effects of climate change on their region or locality well to their students. Ladies and gentlemen, now more than ever, the world needs a new generation of learners and educators. We need learners who can appreciate the scale of the challenges before us. And we need educators who will step forward to act in the spirit of global citizenship and promote a new kind of learning. I believe that transformative green education begins with an understanding that education technology is not simply online learning or even a particular software or program that merges technology with education. Rather, it is about creating an ecosystem that ensures local adaptability of the program at hand, requires a well-functioning infrastructure, develops a sufficient and competent human capital, and is housed within a visionary, committed, and supportive policy environment. To witness a true innovation, we must be prepared for a disruption of the traditional concept of education as we know it, and a reshaping of the existing learning structures. While this may sound ambitious, it simply means that we must proactively explore new ways of learning and create a culture of embracing change that can break down barriers of inflexibility, inaccessibility, inefficiency, and inequity. This is the reason that the current UN Secretary General called for the Transforming Education Summit last year, together with UNESCO, at which, I quote, "greening and digitalizing education," unquote, got global focus. Local actors, including teachers, schools, businesses, NGOs, and universities, need to be supported and should take a more proactive role in leading the change of our education system, appropriately adapted to their specific context and environment. Through such locally driven initiatives, relevant partnership can be forged, genuine collaboration will be fostered, and valuable feedback of local experience and knowledge will be channeled back into the system. I am delighted that today's panel brings together examples of leading efforts of greening education from Europe to East Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. I hope that the ensuing discussion will serve to illustrate international pathways and opportunities to greening education and will provide inspiration and momentum. Dear all, reimagining key transformative elements is essential to ensuring that education contributes to building peaceful societies, a healthy planet, and shared progress that benefits all. I thank you for your attention and action to this end. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, this global engagement and empowerment forum comes at a time when the urgency of the climate crisis is becoming clear to all. The extreme weather events over the past year have had dramatic human consequences, and this crisis spares no one. In the words of the UN Secretary General Guterres, it's truly a battle for our lives. The efforts that lie before us are significant. Let me mention some data. A review of 100 countries conducted by UNESCO shows that 3/4 of young people say they cannot explain climate change or do not anything, almost anything about it. Yet half of our countries do not mention climate change in their curriculum, and less than 40% of school teachers feel prepared to teach about it. These figures point to a stark truth. We cannot win the climate battle without strong, coordinated and comprehensive action on climate change education. UNESCO took this message loud and clear to the Transforming Education Summit at the UN in New York last September, which brought together decision makers from over 130 countries, as well as young people, civil society organizations, international and bilateral agencies, and the private sector as well. Together with the United Kingdom, Japan, and the UN Environment Programme, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat, and the International Labour Organization, we launched a new important flagship, the Greening Education Partnership, which invites countries and education and climate stakeholders to commit to targets in 4 areas that I wish to recall: greening schools, greening learning, greening capacity and readiness, and greening communities. The partnerships also emphasize the pivotal role of young people and teachers in ensuring that we deliver on our commitments. We know that the young people are thirsty for quality climate change education. This was an unequivocal finding of UNESCO's recent survey of more than 70,000 youth from 160 and more countries. This is why, among other efforts, UNESCO is co-developing a curriculum guide on greening learning together with youth-led and youth-supporting organizations. The guide builds carefully on the evidence and experience that UNESCO has accumulated in education for sustainable development and global citizenship education through the years. Ladies and gentlemen, getting every learner climate ready must be a true priority for governments, for communities, and for families. Today's session is a critical opportunity, in my opinion, for us to hear from you, the experts, on the solutions we can deploy to embed and expand the impact of the Greening Education Partnership. I really wish to thank Yonsei University and the Institute for Global Engagement and Empowerment, as well as the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future and the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens for their hosting of today's forum, in the context of their remarkable efforts to mobilize the international community around the United Nations 2030 Agenda. It's through collaboration, it's through partnership that we will lay the foundations for a truly green education. This is how we will empower learners, children, youth to become the real change makers for the future toward the green transition of our societies. Let's learn for our planet, to act for our planet. I thank you very much.
Thank you again to our high-level speakers, and now I'm very happy to introduce our panel to the audience. We have with us today Ms. Hilije Vansland. She's the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities. We have Ms. Kate Greer. She works for the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Education in London. We have Temilade Salami. She is a youth activist from Nigeria and the Executive Director of ECHO Champions. We have Shannon Cobran. She is the regional team lead for Asia of the SDG Academy of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And last but not least, we have Shirin Nawal Chaya, who is the director of programs of Dubai Cares. And with that, I would also already like to start straight into the questions round to hit us off with Hilije, whose organization, the International Association of Universities, just recently published their report on the third global survey on higher education and research for sustainable development. Hilije, why would you say that higher education institutions should think even beyond greening when it comes to addressing global challenges?
Thank you, Katrin. A very inspiring session with opening remarks that really also head in the right direction. I would like to recall that this is the greening agenda that is now imposed on education, is actually coming after a very long series of reflections that translated in already reports and many activities that have allowed for the world to wake up to the wake-up call that is the one that is climate change today, of which we will hear more. I would like to recall the fact that there was the Brundtland report in the late 80s. There was the Earth Summit, the Earth Charter. There was the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development. There have been decades on education for sustainable development, which led to various COPs. They have been recalled just earlier. They led as well to the adoption in 2015 of Agenda 2030 on education for sustainable development, transforming our world. And it led to even regional level initiatives that really are more policy driven and politically driven than led by the education sector. So there is, over the years, this real political will to put on the agenda of our communities and society at large the need to address the global challenges that we face. That said, we have also looked over the years. It's been 30 years that the International Association of Universities has engaged us. I will respond to your question now more specifically. And we have seen that these political agendas actually call on education to do a whole lot, yet they don't develop these agendas with the higher education sector. And where ESD has now traveled a very long way, we see that education for sustainable development remains a concept that sometimes is not sufficiently perceived as an agenda that would be conducive to the kind of partnerships that we need between the education sector and the political sector. We need to really engage the university where it can offer information, where it can offer opportunities to better understand the data upon which to develop the kind of policies that we need for the future. So we hope that in this whole continuum of initiatives that have been developed over time, education certainly also includes higher education. A lot has happened. Universities have engaged. They have a lot to offer. They're really the place to go to better inform where we need to go and understand better how climate change can be addressed in its full breadth. Not only greening, but way beyond in all the different dimensions that are those that we have addressed over time when it comes to education for sustainable development. And it has to actually really reach out to all the different disciplines. It calls for a true interdisciplinary approach in higher education, and that needs support from the political arena as well. So greening to me is a danger to a certain extent because it will actually have the potential to bring us back in time instead of move us into the future, because it's reducing to the environmental dimension of things. We've heard it is about not taking the plane, staying where we are. This is not the topic. We have a real global challenge set and developed in 17 different sustainable development goals that require for a real systemic change of our society that only can go through very strong engagement of all the education level from pre-primary to lifelong, but through higher education where 250 million students can make the difference for the future. So let's hope we don't go for greening only, we go for education for sustainable development.
Thank you so much. And we heard in the introductory remarks already that we need to think about an educational ecosystem, but we actually have to think about an ecosystem of the entire world and think beyond the silos and have that really useful conversation between the policymakers and the educators and the teachers and the trainers. Thank you, Hilije. I want to move on to Kate. You're also working in greening education or more sustainability education. How do you make sure that these processes are just and fair? How can you really include everybody in that in the process of greening education, or maybe even going beyond to more sustainable education?
Thank you, Katrine. It's an enormous question, isn't it? And I'm not sure that we could ever ensure that greening education processes are to be just and fair. But I think what's important here is that we articulate a commitment and an intention for something to happen in this regard. So to that end, I would say that if greening our education processes are to be just and fair, there needs to be clear recognition through our policies, through our practices, that inequity lies at the core of the unfolding crisis that we're experiencing, and that this recognition, there needs to be recognition in our education processes that humans and their extractive processes are serving gross injustice upon the planet and upon all other species on the planet. There needs to be recognition that there's also a lack of justice amongst humans, and that some individuals continue to benefit from that extraction while many others fall behind. There needs to be recognition that the crisis is having the most catastrophic effect on poor countries and on poor people in rich countries, and that this intersects with other forms of disadvantage. And then alongside the recognition of those injustices, which can find itself in lip service, if the intent of greening education is to be just and fair, there needs to be a genuine commitment to pursuing locally appropriate remedies. And so its objectives need to centre around fostering citizens with capabilities to live sustainably with all inhabitants of the earth. And this recognition and the commitment to overturning them will increase the chances of any processes being just and fair. And in the absence of such commitments, I think that education will continue to tinker at the edges. Now, such a commitment can be the guiding light for decision-making and action across all dimensions of education. So it can guide thinking about the knowledge that is produced and reproduced through our education. For instance, in schools, does our curriculum actively support young people to foster values that centre on care and love for other humans and other than human species? It can guide thinking through the systems and structures of education. So do our education systems actually enact sustainably, and do they authentically demonstrate sustainability to learners and the communities that they serve and operate amongst? And it can also guide our thinking about policy texts and policy development processes. So who has a voice in their preparation? What discourses do those texts perpetuate? So our discourses of green skills, which is a very popular commonly used expression now, are they wedded to economic growth only, or are they promoting the view that every job, every person in every industry needs to be skilled to be able to operate in relationship with the earth for fair and equitable survival of all inhabitants? And then it can also guide reflection and generation on our educational cultures. So are our educational cultures promoting values of competition and individualism, or are they promoting values of care and love? These ideas are not new. As has already been pointed out, this is not necessarily new thinking, and they're not mine, but the commitment to them is essential, and reflection upon them in every dimension of education is essential if we are to ensure that greening education is just and fair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I love your focus on the values and the understanding of people and humans amongst each other, and the active citizenship, which is something that's really dear to us at the Ban Ki-moon Center as well. And for me personally, the idea that every job has to be able to work in a green setting is absolutely key. And I really thank you for that comment. Moving on to Temi Lade, who is really working concretely with activists and young people in Nigeria. How do you think, now bringing it to an African context, how can the climate education gap be bridged within Africa?
Thank you so much, Catherine. There are quite a number of ways we can bridge the climate education gap in Nigeria, but I'll be mentioning 5 on this call. The first one is teachers training, and this is one of the parts that we do not pay a lot of attention to when it comes to, coming up with ideas or even embedding climate education into our systems. And we ignore teachers most times and forget that they are literally the backbone of any educational system. So if the teachers do not know how to teach climate change, the students cannot know what climate change is. So we must pay attention to our teachers, upskill them, and also pay attention to their professional development, equip them with the right knowledge so they can pass on that same knowledge to their students. The second one is holistic greening of curriculum and upskilling. And this is very important because one of the things that I see is that we are teaching climate change in silos. So I studied environment development and policy at the University of Sussex for my master's. But that is me who is interested in environmental education. That is me who is interested in environmental policy. What is the fate of a typical person who do not want to go to do a master's, right? How do we make sure that we embed environmental education into our curriculum without having to, put it as a singular subject that someone has to have interest before they go study? So we need that holistic curriculum review, because what we have now is not really preparing learners for the future of work and not getting them climate ready. So a typical student in my school might not even have an idea about what global warming is or what climate education is, and that needs to be fixed, because if we do not know, we really cannot act. The third one is advocacy. In the recent UNESCO ESG survey that was launched at COP27, that I had the privilege of giving the feedback on all the surveys, 70% of the youth surveyed say that they cannot explain climate change. And this shows the gap in advocacy. We we need to do more with contextualized, messaging when it comes to Africa, because the realities are so different, and we need more, we need more push for that advocacy, because people do not know what climate change is. Majority of people living in my country do not know what climate change is. They are experiencing it firsthand, but they cannot put a name to it. And advocacy is one of those tools that we can use to solve that. The next one is tailored and contextualized climate communications. And I'm quite particular about this because there is a way we've taught climate change over time that does not fit into the context of the realities of Africa. And that needs to also change across different regions, continents, and even communities. We need to bring our climate communications from science to what everyone can understand, either as a farmer, as a teacher, or even as a family person who just wants to teach their kids about how to conserve natural resources and how to take care of their environment. So we need that tailored and contextualized climate communications in Africa. The last one is partnerships and collaboration across every sphere to bring about systemic change. We cannot work in silos. We need everyone to work together. We need Catherine, we need everyone on this call to bring in that synergy so that we can have more reach and also build more momentum for climate change and also for climate education, so that we can see systemic change across NGOs, CSOs, governments, countries, and even international organizations. This is very key, and it's going to allow us, as a continent in Africa, to be able to push for climate education and also push for climate change knowledge in our continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Temilare. This is amazing insight. I mean, I have not participated in surveys and read any, but I could argue that even in Europe, people wouldn't be able to successfully explain what climate change is, although they are feeling it quite a lot already. And I love the idea of talking and doing better work in communicating the scientific knowledge towards regular people and citizens who need to understand what it is and what it means. So I really like that idea. And I think we are already seeing a thread here of working together and crossing boundaries and silos. So that's awesome to see. Thank you. Moving on to Shannon. You are working for the SDG Academy, and I would like to know if you could maybe give us some ideas, maybe also bringing it back to the first point that Temilare made about teacher training. What kind of resources do you offer as the SDG Academy in terms of greening education, climate change education, and those things?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all my fellow panelists. I think the more I'm hearing from everyone, the more I'm just sitting here going, yes, absolutely. That's everything, everything we need. So if you are not familiar with the SDG Academy, we are the flagship education initiative of something called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And for the past, I think, 9 years now, we have been creating and distributing free educational resources to help meet a lot of these needs we've been talking about, particularly for adult learners, but we also have materials for younger learners that I can get into. But to really solve some of these issues of, there are all of these calls out there to transform the world, to green jobs, to green policy, and I'm using green in the holistic interdisciplinary way that we've been talking about here. That includes things like climate justice, just transition, equity and inclusion, all of the things that we know go along with sustainable development and the broader sense of what it means to green the world. But really, there's this big call going out, and how are people going to get access to the knowledge that they need in order to understand and transition their jobs, their lives, their education systems, their policies to meet the needs of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the SDG Academy has, at this point, I think over 40 massive open online courses that we host on edX.org. And we are the only SDG-focused partner on edX, but we have courses on the science behind climate change taught by Michael Mann. He's one of the world's leading climate scientists. We have courses on the SDG framework and policy and financing. If you want to learn about the principles behind macroeconomics or the role of living heritage in the sustainable development discussion. We have courses that we've worked with so many amazing partners and experts to develop and make available for free as a global public good to help distribute all of this expert knowledge to the people who need need the knowledge in order to make these changes possible. On the topic of teacher training and really getting into both higher education and primary and secondary education, we work with university professors, we work with lecturers and teachers and trainers to help them utilize our online resources to enhance their teaching, to bring in new perspectives, to help bring in that more interdisciplinary approach to a topic that they might be teaching in a more traditional way, and using this incredible access to these amazing experts to teach a little differently and bring in more of that education for sustainable development, green justice perspective to whatever topic they're teaching. We talk about it's got to be interdisciplinary. Every job, every person, every lifestyle can learn from, benefit, and make changes to advance this agenda. And I'll just briefly say on the K through 12 side, we have an amazing initiative at SDSN called the Global Schools Program. And they work specifically with primary and secondary schools, teachers, school leaders across the world to train teachers in this fantastic cohort of advocates. And through that network, they've now trained, I think, reached 73,000 students around the world. They have case studies and lesson plans and activities guides and curated resources for students. And I'm sure that I can share links to all of these things with our friends at the Ban Ki-moon Center to send out to anyone who's interested. But we're really happy to be able to make all of these resources available for free to solve all of these problems of access to information that we've just been discussing. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and also thank you to the SDG Academy to really providing all of this information and these courses and trainings for free. I do love the idea of these courses and this information being a public-private, global public good, if I can get it out. Thank you so much. Last but not least, let me turn to Shireen. Shireen, I was in a call with your Director General 2 days ago, where you very powerfully, as Dubai Cares, greened your logo even. So I would like to ask you, Shireen, are we on the way to achieving SDG 4? And what is Dubai Cares' strategy moving forward when it comes to the greening agenda?
Thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. And unfortunately, we're not on track to achieve SDG 4. Not if we continue the way that we are currently continuing, not if we continue trying to put essentially Band-Aids on a system that's broken. And if there's nothing that we've learned from the pandemic, we should have learned that the challenges that we saw in the education sector were in fact not new. It was just a mirror that was now being placed right at the heart of things that we should have addressed decades ago. However, this is where the golden opportunity lies. What we need is a complete transformation. And I love everything that I've heard today because it's at the heart of what Dubai Cares is doing. So we launched the Rewiring Education for People and Planet report at the Transforming Education Summit. And a central piece there is a framework for global education transformation. And it is here that we mentioned that we should stop asking ourselves what should be done to education, right? Because inevitably we start being locked into these systems and these paradigms. We need to ask ourselves, who is the human being of the future? And how would that human being see themselves in the world and their role in it? And what are the kinds of values, skills, knowledge, and experiences that they would need in order to get there? Now, we also need to shift the focus a little bit. So in order for us to, make sure that these values, skills, knowledge, and experiences are there, we immediately start looking at curricula and assessments and teachers and teacher training, which is all valuable. But we also need to make sure that there is a world that's waiting for these young people once we have equipped them with these skills, right? So we need to make sure then that there are opportunities waiting for them where they can exercise this creativity and this innovation to green further their countries and their economies. And so for us, it's also important to make sure that we're approaching this from a whole of society ecosystem approach that's built on cross-sector collaboration. So For us, there's no such thing as an education problem. There's, we are people and planet, for people and planet. What we need to bring to the table are teachers, and we call them human experience teachers. We need to make sure that we bring school leaders and principals, but also we need to bring government. And government here does not mean ministers of education alone. It's the ministers of finance, labor, economy, and trade, all sitting together at the table with the productive sector and the private sector, where their voices are inputs into the teaching and learning process. And we also need to make sure that we are a little more humble in some of our assumptions around where learning happens, right? We talk about green skills and greening education systems, but that would only reach those who are in the system. And there are currently millions of children and young people who are outside of the system. And it doesn't mean that they do not have values, skills, knowledge, and experiences that we need to build on, and that we need to make sure that we all our efforts leave no one behind. So we need to have alternative pathways for learning to get those skills to them, but we also need to have the kind of pathways that allow them to use these skills quite tangibly. And that's what we're doing at Dubai Cares. We want to bring the world. We want to not just bring our education actors. We want to bring everyone who has a stake in it. Education, the food sector should be there. The health sector should be there. Water, energy. Education is at the heart of achieving all the SDGs, and we will be demonstrating that in very concrete, tangible solutions. And if we get a chance, we'll talk a little bit more about what this means for the upcoming COP28 moment for all of us as the sector.
Thank you, Shireen. I love the idea of thinking about the human we want to see in the future, which is also coming back a little bit to the theory of change of the Ban Ki-moon Center, because we want to look at the people who lead the world in the future and how they make their decisions. So I love that idea. And I'm also happy, I kind of ring some bells in terms of almost design thinking for our transformation. So I really, very interesting inputs here. So thank you very much. That concludes our first round of questions. And I will start right back from the beginning now. We have to keep it slightly short if we want to at least have one question from the audience. So if I could just be a little bit strict on time. Going back to Hilegi, to go also get a little bit deeper into the question of partnerships. How do partnerships really, how can they work? What is their role when it comes to a more sustainable education agenda?
Thank you. Thank you for that very broad question there as well. Partnership is really what we should do. And the opening speeches also recalled the fact that we have to work together better. And I think that the last intervention by Shireen also stresses that very strongly. We need to build bridges between realities, between knowledge systems, between all the voices that should be at the table. So the IAU advocates for really value-based, equitable, and inclusive higher education. And that can only happen through better cooperation around the world. And higher education should be considered for what it is. It's a real opportunity to inform, to transform, to reform the world in which we live. But for that, we definitely need to ensure that these constructive, innovative partnerships between the different stakeholders that make our society what it is today sit at the table, work together. So we've created, just as a very quick example, an IAU global cluster on higher education and research for sustainable development, inviting specific universities to dig deeper in each of the SDGs and reach out to society, to schools, to business, to policymakers, and together to help translate actually the global goals into action at all the different levels within society and around the world. But it is all to be based on what Kate also reminded us of, and Shireen and Shannon and Tamirade also recalled. We have to have this value-based, very inclusive approach to things that we do, and we have definitely to move away from competition and segue into cooperation.
Thank you so much. I love the idea of cooperation. and bridging all of these gaps. So this is really, really important. And I'm again very happy to hear that we have so many similarities amongst our thoughts. Kate, do you have a specific example for us, maybe since you are based in the UK, in terms of how policy has actually already worked or is not working when it comes to climate change education?
Sure. Thank you, Katrine. So I've done quite a bit of research looking at climate change education policy landscapes. And I think firstly, I'd point out that my research is focused on England rather than the UK as a whole, because each of the nations of the UK have a separate approach. But I think that's an important point to make, because I think we often want to pick up a policy from one national context and put it down in another and let it, live its life. But actually policy very much emerges from a local context, from a history, from a landscape, from a people. And so the idea of having nationally or locally or regionally tailored responses to climate change is really important in education. So it's a point worth making. Now, in England, there has long been a policy gap for climate change education. There hasn't been a strong national vision or a plan for its implementation. And education's had a really low profile in climate change policies, and climate change has had a low profile across education policies. In education policy, there's few mentions of climate change, and where it has appeared, it's been limited to some mentions in the curriculum. For example, the notion that there's an environmental crisis or we need to change is missing from inspection policies, and inspection policies play a really powerful role in the way schools operate and the choices that school leaders make. And this notion of we needing to develop a reciprocal relationship with the earth, you would leave school and not realise that was a value set that it really is necessary for us to rebuild. So then in last year, a new strategy was launched in England, the Sustainability and Climate Change, a strategy for the education and children's services systems. And it's terrific to see that the UK government has put a mark in the sand to say we are committed to taking action in this space, and that there is a place for education in response to climate change. And this step is due to a great deal of advocacy from organisations and individuals outside of government, as well as from an enormous number of people within government who are passionate and who work within particular structures that they work within. And so while it is welcome, I guess of key concern here is the need to continue to advocate for ongoing policy change, because the strategy does fall short in many dimensions, I would say, particularly when an emphasis of the in-school activity that it promotes is optional or is extracurricular. And we know that when sustainability education, climate change education, environmental education falls in the space of the optional or the extracurricular, it's inequitable. And it's only then available to those schools that have the resources, or those students, as Temilada said, who are passionate and committed. And so what we actually need in an education system that's really strongly governed by inspection, by exams and by curriculum is that we need to see change in inspection and in exams and in curriculum. So I think what this says is that although there's now a mark in the sand that says this is a commitment to climate change education, the work of policy advocacy and the work of policy change is ongoing as the crisis continues to unfold and the urgency increases. So it's certainly not a time to settle back and let it happen. It's time for us all to step up and continue to advocate for change. So thank you.
Super, thank you, Kate. Again, we're coming back to the people, right? It's the passionate people within the governments and the education sector that really made it so far, and now we have to push, and it's interesting to see how many levels are involved to make sure that we really have a useful and sustainable climate change education in our curriculums that really includes everybody and not just the privileged. So thank you so much for that intervention. Next is Temilada, because you were just already mentioned before. This is a fairly obvious question. I mean, youth are the people who are affected the most by education. What do you see is their role in really changing climate change education? What can they do as young people to really demand for better climate change education?
Thank you so much, Catherine. Just like you said, we bear the brunt of the climate crisis the most, and we make up majority of the world's population. And one of the things that we've experienced like for a long time is that people have viewed us as beneficiaries rather than actors. And I think that landscape is beginning to change. And one of the ways through which we, one of our roles is policy advocacy, just like Kate mentioned. We've been pushing for a lot of policy change in our national curriculum. Generally, even globally, we've been pushing for climate education to be embedded into our learning systems. The second one is grassroots initiatives and coalition. For example, I've been running an organization since I was in 100 level in my country, and that's been about 6 years now. And what I've been doing is training young Africans on climate change education, and they've gone back to their communities to teach farmers, to teach children in schools. And these are some of the initiatives that we have. We are not waiting for anybody to get the job done, and we are also taking initiative and allowing them to see that we are actors. So we're not demanding for something that we cannot play a part in, right? Then the third one is political pressure. We've seen this happen globally, if not nationally, for my country. But we've seen that many young people they've begun to put political pressure on their leaders to demand, environmental change, climate education in their learning systems. And this has been very, very obvious in the past few years, especially with the movement of climate activists across Africa and generally in the world. The fourth one is behavioral change campaigns. We've seen, for example, in Nigeria, we've seen campaigns like recycle, reuse your bottles. You can get money for bringing your plastics and recycling them. So we've seen behavioral change across board, and we've seen that idea about what recycling is about, how they can actually get money when they recycle their plastics. Then the fifth one is resource production. From organizations like the SDG Academy, we see that they produce learning materials that allow young people like me to be able to teach climate change in schools and also know about what climate change is about. And I think the last thing I will talk about is that one of the things I've seen so far, especially during the Transforming Education Summit and also COP27, is that there's a bit of heightened awareness for organizations like Dubai Cares, for organizations like Earth Day, and even the World Bank talk about climate education. And that was very surprising, to be honest. And we love the fact that, we came to COP and we were able to see some of these organizations giving climate education a platform at their pavilions. And I think that this should also continue, and young people will keep putting that pressure so that we can all work in synergy and get climate education into our systems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Temilade. What struck with me is that you're taking action, but you're at the same time putting pressure on policymakers. So that combination I really like, to not just wait and see, but really doing it on different levels in these 5 different components. So that's amazing to see. Thank you so much for your intervention and for your hard work, Temilade. Moving to Shannon, and we've heard about all the resources and the different things that you put on the website and you share and you make it available. How is there a way where you actually directly engage with educators to really hold their hands as they move into a more empowered way of teaching about climate change?
So we've had a number of initiatives as the SDG Academy where we have been working with different lecturers, professors, educators, to mostly at the higher education level, to help them really understand how to integrate the resources that we've created into teaching that they're already doing. Something like a MOOC, like our online courses, they're really great for self-directed learning for people who are just curious or maybe want to as part of professional development. But they can also be useful, the either elements within the courses, like the lecture videos or quiz questions or reading materials, or the entire course experience itself can be useful in an existing more traditional classroom or more traditional degree program. So we have many people who are interested in sort of doing a flipped classroom model or integrating some of these online resources into their teaching, but maybe aren't as familiar. I think that's less of a problem now after COVID, when everyone had to pivot very quickly to online teaching and the adoption of a wider range of resources. But there are still people out there who are not as familiar or unsure of how to make use of non-traditional materials like that. So we do support educators like that. But I know we're a little short on time, but by way of example, I thought I'd tell a little bit about something we've done here. So my office at the SDG Academy is hosted by Yonsei University in Malaysia, and we've been working with them very closely because I'm here on campus, I've had the opportunity to work very, very closely to help them really transform the way that they are educating their entire campus population, not just the students, but also faculty and staff about the SDGs. It's a university that cares a lot about the SDGs. They have a lot of initiatives to support recycling on campus and a lot herb gardens and zero waste policies. But there was still this question of, do people really understand the underlying issues and the frameworks that are promoting all of these things? So what we did was we created a very short, maybe about a 2-hour training module that is required for all staff as part of their annual professional development KPIs that they have to meet in terms of a training that all staff members have to go through. And it's also recommended for all the students, and I think will eventually be rolled out as a mandatory short course that all students have to take. That gives just a general introduction to the SDGs and the concept of sustainable development, what it means, and how it plays into the education sphere. We're all here participating in education, either working at the university in some capacity or being educated as a student. And so we are all contributing to the education sector as a power player in the sustainable development movement. And the idea behind taking the resources that we as the SDG Academy have and just building this rather short course and building it into required professional development for all the staff is not everyone's going to emerge as an expert on sustainable development, but we want everyone to have that baseline understanding and develop that mindset that helps them understand why are all these initiatives happening on a campus that takes the SDGs very seriously, and then prompting them to think about, okay, if I'm teaching in any discipline, how can I rethink my discipline in the context of sustainable development? How can I infuse my lesson on statistical analysis or business or hospitality or literature? How can you infuse SDG themes into any discipline or any operations, facilities management, custodial work, anything that you're doing as part of the university ecosystem? So that's just one small example of how resources like the ones that we create can be used very creatively to get the message out there and help in small ways transform people's mindsets. But I think a crucial thing is that element that this is part of their professional KPIs for staff here at the university. It making it small, simple, but mandatory is how you get people started, I think. So.
Excellent. It's a very good example. Thank you so much, Shannon. We are definitely short on time, but I heard that there are no specific questions on the chat. So I really want to maybe ask Shireen, because you did kind of allude to it already before. Dubai Cares will have a very prominent role on education at the COP28. So I would really like to give you the final word before we wrap it up in terms of what is planned and what can we get excited about for the next COP.
Thank you. So we have been chosen as the exclusive partner for education by the COP28 presidency, and it is our mission to bring education right at the heart, not just of COP28, but every future COP should have education. And our aim is really to honor that intersection between education and climate by bringing those sectors together, as well as all other sectors, and making sure that we have an alignment on vision and strategy. By way of focus, we're going to look at everything from rewiring teaching and learning to putting educators at the front line of transformation to lifelong pathways for skills and skilling, addressing the financing needs that we have, but also making sure that we position youth as the change makers. Our focus is actually not to talk about the problems, but we want the COP28 moment where we're bringing the second edition of the Rewired Summit is to highlight solutions. So solutions that are already working, people from all around the world who are already doing incredible work, and to make sure that we can get, all the decision makers that are there, from heads of state to ministers, to make the commitments that are necessary there. And this is going to touch on everything from early childhood development, where we have our Dubai Declaration, to connectivity, where we work with UNESCO. We have the Rewired declaration for connectivity, for learning. So it is everything. And so I invite everyone who has any idea, any solution, but also who wants to let us know what they want to see happen and what they want to see on the agenda, to please be a part of the Rewired Summit journey and get in touch with us. And I hope to see everyone there, because this is the moment where we're going to demonstrate that education is at the heart of all the SDGs, and starting with climate.
Thank you so much, Shireen. And as Shireen said, everybody get in touch with her. Dubai Cares is going to get millions of emails now. It's going to be exciting, and we are very happy to partner with Dubai Cares as well as the Ban Ki-moon Center to be there at the COP28. So we do have 5 more minutes, I think, because we started 5 minutes late. And I'd like to invite maybe for like concluding remarks, and I see Hiliji is already getting a little bit anxious on her chair. If you could keep it to 10 to 20 seconds so that we can really wrap it up. It's the last session. We don't want our audience to have to stay longer than necessary. It's already quite late. So I'll go same order as before. So Hiliji, Kate, Temilade, Shannon, and Shireen, 10 to 20 second final statement, please.
Yeah, wonderful. I think we need more conversations like these. Very important to put things on the table. I just want to say that higher education is also research. And we've said it, but we have to reaffirm it. And it would be really nice if also at COP28, there would be real opportunity for research outputs to be translated into their actionable part and presented to the policymakers. Because higher education allows to understand the roots of climate change and to develop the solutions that we need to move into the future.
Thank you. Kate?
I think just looking forward to COP28, I think that's a fabulous place to focus our attention, and it's to really, during this year, then look to the Action for Climate Empowerment workstream, which saw a massive breakthrough last year with the agreement of a 4-year action plan. So between now and COP28, you know, it's to all of us to advocate, to do our political participation and our policy advocacy and our local activity, as Temilade was saying, but to drive action through our governments through that ACE action plan, so a policy framework that already exists. I think that can be a real focus of the work of Dubai Cares and of all of us over the 4 years ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Temilade.
Like I always say at the end of every meeting that I have, if it is without us, then it is really not about us. So I really urge every stakeholder working on climate education to involve youth, not just as an observer or just to tick the box, but to put them at the table, to give them fresh perspective when it comes to climate education, because we have literally been at the forefront of pushing this agenda. So thank you so much, and looking forward to what Dubai Cares has in store for us for COP28. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Temilade. 100% underlining this, bring the youth to the table and listen to them and not just tick the box. I love that. Shannon.
I think if COVID has taught us anything, this idea of crisis to opportunity is that people can make massive changes to policy and implementation when the need arises, and the need is continuing to arise more than ever. So in the field of education, I think urge people to use this as an opportunity, use COVID and coming out of COVID as an opportunity to rethink pedagogy, rethink the materials that you're using, and find more room for flexibility to really inculcate and develop new ways of teaching about sustainability, greening education in all of its forms. But there's never been a better moment to rethink education because we have that opportunity now.
Super, thank you. Learning from the crisis is awesome. Shireen.
I think what we need to, if I have one message, it is, look, we need to rewire education for people and planet. And the key is to do everything that we heard today. For us at Dubai Cares, we have really hit the ground running with solutions. only a week after our announcement, we engaged in an incredible partnership with the Ban Ki-moon Center on a program that puts youth at the heart, that leverages technology to give them the skills. This is the kind of solutions that we need. And I want everyone to, think of the next 10 months as 10 months of solutions that we can come to. And also, so when we come to the COP28 moment and the Rewired Summit, we don't put a vision statement. We actually put a work plan. And immediately, what the day after COP28 is actually should be a continuation of the solution making that we should be engaging with. And I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you, June. This is a perfect concluding remarks. Think about solutions and actions and stop talking in visions, but in work plans. I love that. I'm very hands-on conclusion of this session. I would like to thank all of you so much for taking the time to be with us today, to participate here, to showing a very strong female-led conversation. And I would also like to thank our partners at Yonsei for having us and for giving us this opportunity to discuss this very, very important topic. Thank you also to the team of the Ban Ki-moon Center, especially Philip, who has been coordinating us for the last couple of weeks. So thank you very much to Philip Harnik. And with that, I would like to conclude our panel. And again, thank you so much. And back to Monica and Korea. Bye-bye.